It's time again for the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast with Dr. John Dentico. The mission of our podcast is to provide 21st century leadership training for a talent-driven world. We help organizations implement strategies and practices designed to attract, hire, engage, and retain top talent while mitigating the effects of burnout. Our guests are experts in various fields of organizational dynamics, including, but not limited to, leadership, management, communication, and coaching. They bring a world of knowledge and solutions to our viewers and listeners. I am sincerely grateful for their participation and ideas. So let's dive in. And if you enjoy our podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We genuinely appreciate your support. Hello again and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Dentico. With me today is Dr. Ashley Poklar. Ashley is a change agent and a licensed clinical psychologist, educator, and parent. Her work tends to cycle around the theme of bridging the gaps between psychology, education, and parenting. Ashley believes that systemic community-wide change is the only way things like child exploitation will ever be eradicated. I am truly pleased to have her here with me today on the podcast. Hello, Ashley. How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
You are most welcome. I'm very grateful for you to be here. So let's dig in. What do you say? Ashley, take me down the road a bit with this notion of systemic community-wide change. Can you peel that onion back? Can you describe what you mean by community-wide change? And please, if you would, use examples from your work, again, without naming names, of how you see its implementation.
Yeah. I started out as a special education teacher and then went on into counseling and then into psychology. And so a lot of the work that I did was one-on-one, individual therapy for a child. Often I would include their families when I could, but in the schools I worked in, which were alternative schools, and in the jail, the juvenile justice center, parents weren't involved. They weren't allowed to be involved or they were unable to be involved. And I was finding that I was just hitting wall after wall. We could change a child, but they go right back into the system that they were created in. And the system, if it's not getting the support it needs, it doesn't change. And we see that over and over again in the anti-exploitation space, where a child is removed from a trafficking situation or an abusive situation, and they're placed into what's supposed to help them through the foster system. And that system's flawed, not by nature of people not trying, but by nature of all these silos. There's great people doing great work in silos, and they're not communicating with each other because they're overworked, underpaid, under-resourced. I don't get paid. Insurance doesn't pay me for a phone call to a doctor, doesn't pay me for a phone call to a grandma. You only get paid for that direct work with that individual, which then means that nobody has the time or the bandwidth to do these connections. And so I really started looking at, how do we change the system? How do we create communities of care? We had those, but as our society has changed over the last couple of decades, we're really losing that society taking care of all children. And it's really insulated into, I'm taking care of this child in front of me, and I don't know who to go to or who to ask for help. And so I really am looking at, how do we build those communities? And one of the things that we provide through the nonprofit I work with, Sentinel Foundation, is a comprehensive psychological assessment for kids who've experienced trauma. And it's free to families, which means we don't have to play through insurance, which means I can give all the tests that I think are helpful instead of only the ones that insurance will tell me I'm allowed to use. And what that gives me is a really robust understanding of how that trauma is impacting that child. And the really powerful part of that document is the recommendations for the school, for the family, for the therapist. So everybody's working from that same blueprint, that same path, and they all have the same understanding of the child. And so basically, I'm breaking down the silos to best support that child. And it's really been beneficial. We've seen kids who went through our initial pilot program that were able to access services that they never would have been able to access. Their parents didn't know those services existed. They didn't have the right diagnoses. The schools are more willing to give accommodations if the assessment's done and already prepackaged for them. And so it really is looking for ways to engage the community, looking for ways to break down those barriers that are causing those silos. And again, it's not the fault of the people in the silos, it's a fault of the system as a whole and how it's been created. So we're basically, again, working around the outside, working outside of the norm, working outside of the system to dismantle and rebuild those bridges.
I'm a systems thinker. I've grown up as a systems thinker. As you well know, every organization is a system of systems. And the work you're doing, I have to give you a lot of credit. Taking on systemic change in any organization is incredibly difficult because they are still founded on this hierarchical, bureaucratic model where silos are part of its makeup. The problem, of course, is in that mindset, in the bureaucratic mindset, bureaucracy hates change. It simply despises change. Every once in a while, it can handle incremental change or a tweak here and there. But in the world, in the VUCA world we live in now, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, where change is every day, it seems, these systems are having a harder time keeping their hands on the control of things. One of the examples I use now is the hybrid work environment, where people are now in a distributed format rather than sitting in their brick and mortar places, you will know. So my hat's off to you. Systemic change is hard. One of the great authors, Peter Senge, wrote a book called, many years, 1996, wrote The Fifth Discipline, which I've taken a lot of from in my own work, the systems thinking, this kind of stuff. And in there, he writes, somewhere in the book, I remember this, him writing that the system as it exists is like a human body. Okay. It's functioning as a body. And whenever change is introduced, it's almost like a bacteria. You know, the bacteria comes into the body and the body says, wait a minute. Hey, let's mount up. We got to kill that. We got to kill that bacteria off. We got to kill that change off. So the organization itself becomes its own hindrance to making change, the bureaucratic mindset. And if people are wondering, who are listening to this, if you have a bureaucratic organization, just go to your manual and see if you have an organization chart. And if you have that boxy looking thing, you're there. You're owned by the bureaucracy. But we have to find a way, in my opinion, where the bureaucracy can exist. It's not going away. It's just not going away. But at the same time, allow for creativity and innovation within the confines of the structure that it creates. Structure's important, but there's got to be this give and take. Anyway, thanks for the comments. Really good. Ashley, I've been waiting to ask you this question. I got to tell you that. There was a number of ideas in your bio that caught my eye. Can you enlighten me, my listeners and viewers, on the myth of work-life balance? I am so very interested in your perspective. First, can you define the general idea behind work-life balance? What do people normally associate with work-life balance, that is, and why this notion doesn't work for you?
Yeah. So oftentimes you think of work-life balance, or people that I've spoken to think of it as this belief that you can somehow find that perfect scale space where they're both getting equal attention and equal support. And that's some miraculous, magical space that we can all be in. Having gone through a doctoral program while raising 4 children under the age of 4 and trying to make money enough to support them while doing school, I began to realize that there's no such thing as balancing. This idea that everybody's going to get equal time and equal energy was making me feel like I was a bad student. The mom guilt was high. I was running myself ragged, trying to equal time, equal energy. And I really started to reject that idea of balance and started to look at it more as I'm just prioritizing. This one's going to be higher at this point, and then I will work a 12-hour day so that I can be home the next day. So all attention on work on day one, all attention on home on day two. And that worked some, but it still wasn't enough. And so really I started leaning more into the idea of work-life integration. Where can I integrate family and work together? And that really comes from my beliefs around living your purpose, living meaningfully, based a lot off of Viktor Frankl's work and those kinds of spaces. But purposeful living tends to lead to happier living, more contentment. And so I started looking for how to connect my life, my children with my work. And sometimes it was I took them into work with me. Honestly, that's where I ended up post COVID is I quit working a normal job so I could homeschool my kids and really lean into that nonprofit space. And now my kids are part of that nonprofit space. They help me train police officers. They help me create flyers and they help me build awareness building activities that are focused on children. And so I've given up balancing in favor of integrating and really prioritizing my values as opposed to prioritizing work or prioritizing family.
Great answer. Oh, God. I am a devotee of Viktor Frankl. I read Man's Search for Meaning in 1997, and it changed my life. The thing I love more than anything else about Frankl is in the world of psychology, he's the optimist. He's the one that says, find your purpose. Or as Joseph Campbell, the great scholar of mythology, would say, find your bliss. Find what puts fizz in your soda, as I like to say, and what makes you feel alive. And I will tell you, I have talked to numerous podcast guests, and inevitably, the idea of purpose surfaces, how important it is, not only for an individual per se, but for an organization that you're part of. In a few weeks, I'm going to do a strategic thinking session for a company. We're going to all meet up in Texas. And I asked them, do you guys have a mission statement? Oh yeah, we're working on that. Okay. So they sent it to me. Good group. By the way, good group of people, wonderful people. And it was like 4 paragraphs long. I said, no, that doesn't work for me. Everything's going to be focused on living and breathing a sense of purpose in the organization. So I said, you got 1 sentence. That's all you get. 1 sentence. And every day you walk in and you say, that's who we are. This is not a mission statement you put on the wall and nobody ever looks at it again. This is everybody is focused, laser focused on being this, on doing this. This is who we are. This is what we do. So I absolutely agree with you. The sense of purpose is so very important. And you're right. You do have to prioritize. There are times you're in the midst of something, for example. You can't just say, I'm finished with that today. I can't do that anymore today. No, I like to say, do the things that are in front of you. Don't worry about anything else. What do you have to do? Okay, I got to do this. Okay, do it. If you take care of the things today, tomorrow will take care of itself. So I truly believe in that. And I think that's so informative. And I'm going to use that when I talk to people when they say work-life balance. But integration is really where it's at. I absolutely 100% agree with you. Let me ask you this next question. Over the course of the last year or so, I have learned so much from my podcast guests. I get more out of it than probably people who are listening to the podcast do. So much so that a part of my work now centers on the implication of leadership in this post-pandemic world and the role in preventing or mitigating the effects of burnout. Okay. From your point of view, can you explain your approach to preventing or mitigating the effects of burnout?
Yeah. So burnout was actually an interest of mine in my research. And so my dissertation had a piece of burnout in it. And I also did a meta analysis that we never published, but it looked at burnout interventions in the helping professions and looking for which ones were most effective. And what we found is none of them were effective. There was no statistically significant impact from burnout interventions. And then that got me really thinking, why? Why wasn't the mental health days and the classes and all of those things, why weren't they helping? And it's because they're done after burnout hits. And once burnout has fully manifested itself in somebody, no band-aid approach to fixing it is going to make burnout go away. And so I've really gone a full 180 in how I think about burnout and how I talk about it with my clients and with my students when I teach doctoral level classes. And it really is, how do you set up your life in such a way that you're able to be resilient and you're able to buffer against the stressors that are coming so that burnout's not even something that you experience? And how can you be self aware and start to catch that emotional exhaustion early and do those next level interventions beyond just the healthy living, so that you can manage and mitigate the emotional exhaustion so it doesn't spiral into the reduced personal accomplishment and the depersonalization or cynicism that's in burnout. And I also want to highlight the reduced personal accomplishment. If you're living those values purposefully, you don't experience that reduced personal accomplishment because you're finding value in what you're doing. So living your values is a way to buffer against the burnout.
Very interesting. I'm working on this idea of the implication of leadership. How, what do we say leadership is? Okay. And it's very important from my perspective. And I'll just characterize it a little bit here. There are two sides to the leadership dynamic, as far as I'm concerned. 99% of the people in the world, consultants and trainers and leadership people, spend their time on the human development side of leadership. Okay. If you just had the right traits. I bumped into a website one time, said the 57 traits of a leader. And I thought to myself, what happens if I only have 46? Is it over for me? That kind of a thing. The charisma. Oh, the charismatic leader. Great. Nice to have. But what happens if you have a charismatic leader and you don't trust them? Okay. Because trust really is the foundation point. And behaviors, there's a difference between actions and behaviors, is something that I'm really deeply in, and I wrote about it in my book. Behavior is an unconscious reflective response, whereas action is a subjective, conscious a movement, if you will. And that in order to create new behaviors, you have to do subjective things to overcome the behaviors, to create new habits. Years ago, I read this book that talked about the rule of 7. You might be familiar with this, that in order to change a behavior or a habit, you have to engage in the new habit or new behavior 7 times for it to stick. I always call it the rule of 7. So I think so much for me is, how do we go into this idea of leadership not as this set human-centered thing, but as a process of practices that everyone can engage in, right? My leadership model I started developing 30 years ago has one basis. The basis is contribution. That's it. Contribution. We have a problem. Here's the problem. Who wants to help? Who's got an idea? Everybody's invited. Cuts through the morass. It's all about what we do together. So to me, that is the battle that is now going on, is this movement from this hierarchical, traits-based, behavioral-based, if you will, sense of leadership, to the fact that we're now opening it up more to contribution by all who want to become involved in the leadership process. And the thing that's driving a lot of it is hybrid work, because we're shifting to what many scholars and practitioners are now coming to understand, and that's this idea of leadership as an influence relationship, and it's not position bound. Anybody can exert influence in the dynamic. So I absolutely agree. The second thing I want to call out about burnout is the notion of creativity. How creativity can help alleviate a lot of the effects of burnout. Take a cooking class. Go on a local archaeological dig, I like to say. Do some, learn rock climbing. Pick up a musical instrument. These things help us find relief from the problem. And the last point I want to make, if I can, and I'm going to turn it over to you, okay, in a second, is let me turn it over to you now. I kind of lost that there, but go ahead.
I was just going to say to the creativity piece, I tend to refer to that as find joy in every day. If you can find joy in every day, and it doesn't have to be in your workspace, then it helps to buffer against that burnout. I think we have this idea as a society that you have to get your value and your purpose and your meaning from your workplace. And that's not always an option for everybody. You have to pay bills. And sometimes that means you're working at a job that you don't particularly like, or you've decided you don't like it, but you're close to retirement. And so, again, and this goes back to that integrating work and life, then find purpose and meaning elsewhere, find the joy elsewhere, and be creative in what you find that's purposeful in your work. It might not be the actual job, but maybe a relationship with somebody that you work with, or you're mentoring somebody, and that's purposeful and meaningful to you. And so it really is about thinking creatively and not just leaving yourself in that little tiny box that we call the work self.
The single greatest motivation force on the planet is meaning. I'm doing something that's meaningful to me, wherever, as you say, wherever you find it. People want to matter, and they want their work to matter, and they want to gain a level of control and autonomy over their own lives. Or as I like to say, people really do want to become masters of their own fate. So when you can provide people, and here's again the implication of leadership, when you can provide people that opportunity to become involved in something meaningful, or as I like to say, by creating an environment where people come to do their best work every single day, you're on the track. You're going where it needs to go, and the people will go with you, and they'll be joyful in doing that. The third thing, and I remembered what I wanted to say now. You've heard of this fight or flight, right? Fight or flight. We have two choices: fight or flight. Well, so I asked myself this question: what happens if you can't fight and you can't run away? There's a third one. I call it digging in and enduring. Sometimes you have a job you really don't like, but you have to pay bills. You've got kids going to school, ballet fees, soccer fees, whatever. And as much as you don't like that, you have to endure. And here's the most interesting link. It links exactly back to Frankl's idea of suffering nobly, or making the best of a bad situation, where even within that context, you can find meaning. You find meaning for the pain, meaning for the sacrifice. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's optimal, but certainly it's a choice that people can make. Great. Let me move on to the next question if I can. Ashley, you call yourself a reluctant leader. Why is that? And can you speak to your perspective on leadership and its importance in creating community-wide systemic change?
I have found that when I step up into what we tend to view as a leadership position or a leadership role, it's because nobody else would step up. And so that's where that reluctant leader piece came from. I don't seek leadership roles. I don't seek being particularly that traditional view of leader, but I do find that I ask myself questions, and they're the same questions I tell my learners to ask themselves and my kids to ask themselves. What would happen if I didn't step up? Is there somebody that's better qualified than me to step up? And what's the worst that could happen if I did? And if the answer is there's nobody else that I know or nobody else in the room that's going to be that voice, and that I'm at least somewhat in my level of competency, and the worst that could happen is somebody might not listen to me, then I lean into it. It's taken me a while to learn how to do that and to do it without my heart racing and feeling really out of place. But I find that doing it that way, being that more reluctant leader, the one who I have some ideas. Let me throw them out there and see what you all think, has led to what you were alluding to before, where everybody gets to have a voice. And that's where that community of care really works well. Is I come in and I've done it in communities. I've also done it in schools, auditing school counseling programs, auditing their wellness initiatives as a whole. And what I have found is I almost run it like a mini qualitative study. So I'm the principal investigator, just coming in and gaining all the knowledge and all the institutional and generational knowledge that everybody, all the stakeholders have, including the children. The children get a voice in the community of care and in the school settings. And then I just take all that information and lay it out. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm thinking could be helpful when looking at it through that systems view, because none of you have the systems view. You all have your personal experiences and you see your silo or your section, but I step back and I've talked to all the silos or all the sections, and here's what I'm seeing. That is leadership. But again, it's not what I defines leadership as before I found myself in these positions.
Yeah, I can understand. Whenever there's a vacuum, someone will step in, and let's hope it's the right person stepping in, because sometimes the vacuum is filled by the wrong people, by the wrong folks. So I appreciate that. But things have to get done. And if you're the kind of person like me, I'd like to think of myself anyway that way, that where things have to get done, you got to jump in and do something about it. You just can't sit there and say, forget that, I'm not doing that. And that kind of thing. So I appreciate that very much.
It
We're
helps
getting close.
that, oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I was going to say it helps that oftentimes the things that have to get done in my realm tend to be for the best interests of children. And so it adds an added level of you need to speak up and do something to better the outcomes for these kids.
Sure. And normally when you do that, and people see some sort of, I'll call it a logical trail or a logical coming together, people will jump in and join you. So they may not be the ones who want to lead, but they're great collaborators
Mhm.
and they're great partners. And they'll say, listen, I'll help you here. I'll do this, that kind of thing. They may not have the full perspective. They may not have the foresight of where we're trying to take this thing. What if we don't do something, what might happen, the foresight aspect of it. So I agree with you. I think when you step in and do it, people will join. I think they're looking to find meaning in their own lives in that sense. So as I said, we're getting close to the end. And I'd like to ask you my now world famous question. It will be world famous today since I'm going to have a podcast event with someone from India. I've had UK, Australia folks on. It's been great, great. And that is, if you had a magic wand and you could wave at any issue or problem that you see, what would it be? And why did you choose that?
Funnily enough, I think I wrote an answer to that, but I can't remember it. So I will just say, based off of our conversation, actually, and I think my answer changes a little bit. But if I could wave a magic wand, I wish that people would be able to understand that there are these systems in play. I think there's a lot of judgment towards leaders, towards parents, towards school systems, towards just each other for how we are acting in whatever system we're in without really understanding that there's so many parts. It makes me think earlier you were talking about systems and how it's like the human body. And there's a family therapy writer who talks about how families want to go back to homeostasis. They just want it the way that it was. And so all systems work that way. They want homeostasis. And so when you change one little piece, that piece comes back into the system and basically gets beat back into submission, because homeostasis, even if it's dysfunctional, even if it's chaotic, is what the system knows. And so I think that's important in our daily lives when we're interacting with individuals, because all of those individuals are working within various systems that are constantly trying to maintain homeostasis.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, systems want to go back to rest, if you will. They want to be at that you're upsetting the apple cart. This is not the way we've always done it. We know all the words, right? all the refrains. We're not used to doing it that way. And yet, I think the most interesting part of the world we live in today is that because change has become so rampant, because it's on our plate every day, those systems are eventually going to implode. They have to. They can't keep up with the rate of change that is going on in the world today. And that's why you see the stresses on bureaucratic systems, this top down. We'll tell you what we need to tell you. In my work, where there's a talent shortage across the board in so many industries, people will just say, you know what? I'm going someplace else. I don't need to work here. And that in and of itself is such a foundational change maker it's forcing people, forcing organizations to make changes. We just don't have the people we need in order to do the job. A few months ago, I did this podcast it was a webinar, excuse me, for a group of engineers. And by 2026, there's engineering across the board. There's going to be a 6 million person shortage of engineers across the board. They don't have to stay anymore and be in a toxic organization. And the organization senior leaders have their hair on fire trying to figure out what do we have to do to retain these people? It's right in front of you. There it is. You have to create an environment where people want to be here. You have to create meaning at your work. You have to include them in the decision-making processes. Your values have to align with theirs. They have to align with yours. That doesn't mean it's going to happen every time. It means that you'll be able to find the right people who should be with you. And you got to give them training and learning that helps them develop in the future. So the answers are there. The question is, are the organizations going to pick up the mantle, if you will, and run with it? It remains to be seen. But I want to thank you. Sensational job today. I appreciate your great input, your great perspective. The work-life balance thing was wonderful. And all the things you said were wonderful. I want to thank you so much. I want to truly wish you all the success, great health, and everything in your wishful basket for the future. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.